Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette. On this week's episode, a really cool guest. I've been excited and wanting to talk to this gentleman for a long time. We've chatted online many times, and he was nice enough to send me a copy of his book years ago that I read, and that's kind of how I first got to know him. This gentleman is a member of the American Kenpo Hall of Fame, Masters Hall of Fame. He's an 8th degree black belt in American Kenpo. But beyond that, he's written countless books and also very well known as working in Hollywood and writing screenplays for movies and TV. So very excited to have as a guest on the show today, Mr. Tom Bleecker. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for having me. And happy holidays.
Oh, same to you. Yeah. So obviously the episode won't air for maybe a couple months, but we're recording this over Christmas break. So,
well, yes. Then happy holidays for Easter.
Hey, maybe. Hopefully it won't take that long to get the show going, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. But so I obviously mentioned a few of your accolades there, but let's kind of go back to the beginning and just talk about where you got your start in martial arts. Now, was Kenpo your first style? If I remember correctly, was it something to do with you were getting bullied?
What got me into studying martial arts was fear. I was in high school. There was an older kid who was a year ahead of me who had threatened because I started seeing a girl that he wanted to have to be his girlfriend. And he said to me before the summer, he said, every time I see you this summer, I'm going to kick your rear end. He used another word. And he said, at the bowling alley, at a party, at the beach, he says, wherever I see you, I'm going to kick your rear end. And I stayed home. Back then we had 3 months of summer, and I stayed home for the first 2 months of summer. Just wouldn't leave the house. So I was afraid of this guy. He was bigger. He was stronger. He was, all of that. And in the third month, I said to myself, if you run from this guy, you're going to be running from people for the rest of your life. And you got to do something about this. And that's when I got the phone book. When I first began my Kenpo in 1962, there were only a handful of schools in Los Angeles where I lived at the time. I was in high school. I was 16 years old, and I opened a phone book. I didn't know anything about it. All I knew about really was I'd heard about judo and the judo chop, the infamous judo chop. And I said, I need to study some martial arts or some karate or judo or something. And I opened a phone book and I saw Ed Parker's karate school down in Los Angeles on Los Angeles Boulevard. And I drove down there and that's where I started. But there was only Ed Parker. There was Jerry Packard. There was Nishiyama had a Shotokan school. Oh. And Bruce Tegner up in Hollywood. I think that was pretty much it. There might have been one other. But there were only a few schools to start, and Ed Parker was one of them.
And now I suppose in Los Angeles, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of martial arts schools to choose from.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's almost, look up the martial arts schools of all different systems and styles in Los Angeles. And it's kind of difficult navigating through them all. But back then, a lot of people don't know, but Ed Parker back then was the only black belt in the system. And he was a 3rd degree black belt. And when I first met him, he was 32 years old. So that's dating back a while.
So what were some of those first early classes like? What are some of the things that stand out in your memory? And, obviously, martial arts has been around for a while, but, I don't think a lot of schools train like they did back then. I look at the schools I trained in the 90s, even compared to now. And it's different. I mean, times have changed. And I think unfortunately, you got to change the way you do things.
Well, the first thing was I didn't know what to expect. I really didn't. I walked in there. I met a fellow named Lou Capolo, who was a New York radio DJ who had come out to Hollywood to get his break into radio. He was the fellow that appeared on the Lucy show with Ed Parker in the early 60s. I think it was in 62, probably around that time.
Okay.
But I didn't know what to expect. I walked in there. I saw these strange, that looked like what everyone says, pajamas. I bought a gi for $12.50. I paid $20 and I showed up for my first class. I had no idea what I was getting into. And when I saw what Kenpo could do, my first instructor was Sterling Peacock, who later changed his name to Matt David. And Sterling was a brown belt and a Golden Gloves boxer. And he was one tough hombre. Of course, to me, 16 years old in the 11th grade, I think I was just starting in the 12th grade. 11th grade, actually. Just about everybody was a tough hombre. But Sterling was one tough guy. When I saw the blocks and the kicks, mainly basics. And the first things we learned were escape techniques. But our class amounted to a lot of basics, a lot of training in the basics. And there was a warm up, then there was the basics training up and down the mat that lasted for the first 40 minutes. And then we worked on a technique and then we sparred a little bit. I actually started sparring in my first classes, but I don't recall sparring with other students in the beginning. I think I only sparred against Sterling, which was kind of hair raising actually, because, I just wanted to get that over with. There's no way I was going to touch him and I had to avoid those fast hands and kicks of his, but it was good learning experience.
So then 1962, at that point, had he started calling it American Kenpo yet and started a lot of his changes, or was he still teaching more of the Chinese Kenpo style at that time?
Well, I believe he did call it the American Kenpo because my first certificate, which hangs on my wall, is in the AKKA, which is American Kenpo Karate Association.
Okay.
I believe that's what that stands for. The AKKA was his first organization, later became the IKKA International. So he was calling it American Kenpo in 62 because it's on his certificate.
So what was it, those first few classes, what drew you to it? What made you want to keep going with it? A lot of people will try martial arts and it's just not for them. They'll give it up or it's too hard. What made you want to stick with it?
Well, when I saw what this was with the blocks and the punches and the kicks and all, I said, you know what? If I learn this, I'm okay with this guy. It's going to take me a little while, but I'm okay with this guy. And that's what kept me there. It was something that I was going to be able to protect myself. I wasn't going for physical exercise. I wasn't going to make friends. I wasn't doing any of that. I wanted to learn how to fight. I grew up in a household with a single parent, and I didn't have anyone to teach me how to fight. And so Ed Parker was the one that, American Kenpo was the one that taught me how to fight as a kid. That's why I stayed.
Nice. And think about your very first belt test. Do you remember some of the stuff that was involved and some of the techniques you had to do? And so talk just a little about that first belt test, if you remember it and that experience.
Oh, I remember it vividly because it was pretty simple. We didn't have back then colored belts. We had tips on our belt. So the white belt had 4 brown tips that you could earn. Your first grade was for 1 brown tip. And my test was simple. I had to perform short form 1, which was the basics. I had to do the blocks, the stances, and the kicks, and perform short form 1. And I had to recite the creed, and I had to give a history of Kenpo. That was it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Verbally explain the history of Kenpo, recite the creed, perform short form 1, do all the basics. And I don't think I had to do any techniques. If I did, it might have been, it would have only been escape techniques, and there would have only been a handful of them. But that was pretty much it. And I think I earned my first brown tip. Well, I know when I did because I have this on my wall. It was in January of 63. So it took me about 6 months to get my first, a little under 6 months, probably 4 months, 5 months to get my first brown tip.
Do you remember when he added in the color belt to his style? I know that's something that a lot of styles didn't do at first either. And I think that a lot of that had to do with America and just needing something quicker, as a lot of the theories I've heard about it.
Yeah, the color belts came in with the franchising. The big franchising that came in the early 70s, late 60s and early 70s. And they changed over. We changed over to the color belt system with the franchising. That's how it came in. There was a package because people who were coming into American Kenpo with a franchising system, they bought a package. They bought the orange belt package, then they bought the purple belt. They bought the actual package, and it made more sense to have colored belts on the mats and packaging than it did to call it one tip package, two tip package, and to make it a standardized franchise that was going to be nationwide and then of course worldwide, which it actually became. I mean, now that whole Big Red, our teaching manual is international. Everybody, that's what they go by. If you're in the IKKA, your basic foundational curriculum is Big Red.
Okay. And then when you first got involved in this, did you ever think of competition at the beginning? I know as you got in higher belts, you did start competing and doing some tournaments. Was that something that you wanted to do initially? Or I guess would he let people compete at lower belts? Did you have to be a certain belt to go to a tournament back then?
No, I didn't, because there weren't any tournaments.
Oh, okay.
The first real tournament, they were around, but Ed Parker's students did not compete in tournaments until the internationals, to my knowledge. There may be somebody who could correct that. A person would be Chuck Sullivan, who's my closest friend in American Kenpo.
Okay.
The first tournament he competed in was the internationals, along with me, in 1964 in Long Beach. We did, however, have inter-school tournaments. We had Chuck Norris's people came to our school, the West LA school, several times in 1963 and in 64, where we actually competed. It wasn't a tournament. No one awarded any trophies, but our students sparred with their students. That's the closest we came to sparring anyone outside of our school. Of course, you could go to another school, I suppose, and spar with them, and maybe some of our guys did, but there weren't any other Kenpo. The only other school really was Jerry Packard and Nishiyama, which is a Shotokan school. Mm-hmm. So the beginning of the tournaments really happened in August of 1964. And by that time, I was a brown belt.
Okay. And I know I've been only lucky enough to go to one international. I got to go in 1995. And even then, how many years later, it was still quite an experience. It's a cool tournament. And I never got to go, unfortunately, when Mr. Parker was still alive, but it was still a pretty cool experience. And it's still, even then, was still one of the biggest tournaments in the country. So it's kind of cool that, you were there for the beginning of that starting out.
Yeah, I fought in the first one and the second one. And, that tournament, we started at the Long Beach Municipal Auditorium. And it became so big, that first tournament, the amount of people who showed up for that tournament, it was an experience. It was, they never saw so many competitors. It went until midnight. I think after midnight in the first night, and the second day, Ed Parker had to get out before midnight or he'd have to pay more money for the hall to use the auditorium. It was so big and it was so successful that next year they went to the sports arena, the Long Beach Sports Arena. And then it for years and years, it became the number one tournament to win. That's the one that got everybody started. And all the big names, Mike Stone and Joe Louis and Chuck Norris and Benny Urquidez and all of the big name fighters. I've left a whole lot out of them, out of that list, but that's where they got their start. That's where Frank Trejo became known as a great fighter, was at the International. So that was the tournament to win. Billy Blanks was another one who went on to form Taibo.
That's right. Yeah. And some movies too. A lot of movies for him. But now the cool thing about that tournament too is it was open to other styles, which is, not really the norm. A lot of tournaments are so closed and stuff. And I think he was one of the first ones that said, we want to take on other styles. We want to see what we can do against other styles and other systems, which was kind of cool.
He might have been the first one to do that, although Robert Trias, who was at the first internationals, and I think he was on the board, he might have had a tournament. I forgot where Trias came, either Texas or Arizona, somewhere out there. He might have had a tournament before that, but not that big. But the Shotokan stylists, they have their own tournament every year. I think they may still have it. It's called Nisei Week. I think that's correct. Nisei Week.
That sounds familiar.
It was held in downtown Los Angeles. The big back then it was Hideki Nishiyama, and then it was Oshima. Oshima still is trained, I believe, is still teaching, and very, very reputable. If you ever, because you've studied Shotokan, you go up against good Shotokan fighters, you got your hands full.
Yeah, they're tough.
These guys can deliver basics like nobody else.
So now you got your black belt when you were 19 and also started teaching at that time. And, through Kenpo, you obviously living in California, and through Kenpo, you got to meet and mingle and train with a lot of, Hollywood people. And that kind of gave you your start in that way. So, who were some of the people you remember like training with, some of the, Hollywood elite?
Yeah, I didn't really train with any Hollywood celebrities because those people did not come into classes. They were trained privately with Ed Parker and other people. So I never trained with them. We didn't have them in our club. If there were, I wasn't aware of them, and they didn't come to class.
Okay.
But the Hollywood celebrities that I trained, who I later taught, probably the most noteworthy and recognizable would be William Shatner. William Shatner was a student of mine for a long time. He was a very gifted Kenpoist, a funny guy, a great guy, and became a good friend for many years for me. And then later, Blake Edwards, who was a Hollywood director who directed Pink Panthers, all of those franchise movies. I shouldn't call them franchise movies, but the Pink Panther movies. And Blake Edwards got the Academy Award for Life Achievement. So you get the Life Achievement Award with the Oscar, you've got one hell of a career. But Blake Edwards became one of my students. He got his brown belt from me. He never got anything beyond that. Well, that's an accomplishment in itself. But he was my student for many years, and his wife, Julie Andrews, was a student. I taught a lot of Robert Loggia was a guy that I taught for a long time for a television series called The Ferret. And Bob was a good student. I spent a lot of time in Hollywood, but I grew up in Hollywood. It was not really news to me. A lot of people, I was working in as a child actor, not an actor, but an extra, and then later, mainly as an extra. I first appeared on The Real McCoys. You're too young to remember that show, but The Real McCoys filmed at Desilu Studios, and that was my first appearance on television. Was The Real McCoys. I appeared in a corn eating contest against Little Luke in The Real McCoy show, and that was quite an experience. But I later on in the 70s, I was making movies. I was the guy that became recognizable anyway in a movie called The Carey Treatment. It was filmed at MGM Studios, and I did that film with James Coburn, who was a student of Bruce Lee's.
Yes. Okay.
And I was the hospital orderly that got chased all over the hospital by the police because I had marijuana on me. And so in the early 70s, the grass was a big deal. So after that movie broke, I'd be walking through Westwood Village and somebody's, hey, you're the guy that got busted for pot, right, in that Boston hospital. And
that's awesome.
That scene is on YouTube, by the way. If you go to my YouTube channel, that scene is on YouTube.
I will have to check that out. That'd be hilarious to watch. So you mentioned Bruce Lee. Obviously, you became pretty good friends with Bruce Lee kind of early on in your Kenpo career, didn't you?
I did. Bruce started coming into school. The first time I met Bruce, he came into the Santa Monica school, which at that time was the Santa Monica school. We called it Santa Monica before it was called the West LA school. And the first school was the one by the freeway, the 405 freeway. And Bruce came in with another student, was a student of his, James Lee, to see Ed Parker. And I didn't know who he was. I had no idea that these two guys showed up late one evening. I was on my way out. And these two guys walked in, and I watched them do something. I said, boy, these guys are kind of impressive. And that's when I first met him. But I left. I said, no, nice meeting you, and left. The next time I saw him where I could talk to him was at the Internationals in '64, where he gave his legendary a demonstration that really put him on the map in the martial arts world. When he stepped out in the Long Beach Municipal Auditorium and gave that demonstration, I guess it was maybe a 10-minute demonstration.
Okay.
After that, people knew the name Bruce Lee. And then he started coming around, and I got to know him, and I started going over to his house. And, looking back, I started wondering, why did Bruce Lee have such an interest in me with all the people that he was around, a lot of big names. He was around Joe Louis, all the big fighters, he was around, he was training. Why would he bother with this kid in high school and all? Well, the reason why was because I knew a lot of people in Hollywood. I was dating Diane Linkletter, and Ed Parker had appeared on our Linkletter show House Party. And I knew a lot of people in Hollywood, not for any other reason that I just grew up in Hollywood. I just knew my way around town, and I knew a lot of people in the business. And I think that was an attraction for him. He said, this is a guy that can help me. I introduced him to Blake Edwards. He came up to Blake and Julie's house up in Coldwater Canyon and gave a demonstration out by the pool. That was the afternoon that he kicked me the length of a swimming pool, holding an air shield, thank God, an airbag. I'd never been kicked so hard in my life. I mean, this guy kicked me. I think I was airborne. I was running backwards, and I landed in a clump of wet ivy on my back.
Wow.
And I just remember the airbag went flying and I went flying. And the next thing I remember was Bruce looking over me and he said, "Hey, are you all right, man?" And I remember in my mind to this day thinking to myself, thank God I had that airbag, because that kick, he would have broken my sternum and my ribs. My whole chest would have been busted. It was like getting kicked by a horse.
So he was as good as the rumors say. I mean, now online, so many people argue, oh, he wasn't this good. It was all movie stuff. And then there's people who actually met him and trained with him that said, no, he was that good. And obviously he had the goods, I think.
Well, I can attest to two definite things I knew about him. I sparred with him many times, and I didn't do very well. I didn't find myself to be on an equal with him at all in sparring, but I don't know anybody who did that I know personally. But I can attest to his power and his speed. His power and his speed were phenomenal. Ed Parker said at the Tribute and elsewhere, I think Ed Parker said that Bruce Lee was 1 in 2 billion. Wow. And he said, coming from a man like Ed Parker, that is one heck of a compliment. Yeah. I can share with you a story that in 1971, I was doing a film at MGM Studios called Wild Rovers. It was a Western with William Holden and Ryan O'Neal. And Ryan O'Neal had he was a boxer. He was an amateur boxer. I don't think he was Golden Gloves, but he was a skilled boxer and a big guy. Ryan O'Neal was 6'1", 6'2", 200, and a scrapper. He was a real scrapping guy. He wasn't afraid of anybody. And he owned a boxer named Hedgemon Lewis at the time, who was an up-and-coming fighter. And Ryan had heard about Bruce Lee from me and from Blake Edwards, who at that time, Blake was directing Wild Rovers. And we talked about it. He said, what? He does Kung Fu? Yeah, I'm sure that's nice to know. He knows that's putting about. So I told Bruce, I said, why don't you stop by the soundstage one afternoon? And he did. He came by. And suddenly Bruce Lee walked on the set, and I introduced him to Ryan. I said, Ryan, this is Bruce Lee. And Ryan just towered over Bruce Lee. And Ryan said, oh, yeah, you're the guy that does that Kung Fu stuff. And Bruce just said, yeah, that's right. And so he said, well, I'm a boxer, and I this. And Ryan was trying to, build himself up a bit, which is Ryan would do. And then Bruce did what he did to everybody. Not everybody, but a lot of people. He did it to me, and I saw him do it to other people. He looked at Ryan and he said, try to hit me. And Ryan said, excuse me? He said, try to hit me. That's what he said. Try to hit me. He stood there. And Ryan said, you want me to hit you? He said, yeah, try to hit me. And so Ryan danced around a little bit and threw a couple of punches, got nowhere. And then he got very frustrated. And he started kind of going after a little bit more forcefully. And all of a sudden, Bruce Lee cut loose. And Bruce went after him. And about 10 seconds later, Ryan was bent over at the waist with his hands over his head saying, enough, I quit, stop. And Bruce was all over him. I mean, and then that was a wake-up call for Ryan. He had not seen anything like that in boxing world at all. And then Bruce said, and that's the speed. Let me show you the power of the legs. And he gave him a pad to hold. He said, hold this against your chest. And he kicked him Ryan slammed into a trailer. It was on the set, the soundstage. So hard you could hear it, the sound reverberate through the soundstage. Blake Edwards later said that he thought Ryan's back trouble that he had for years started with that kick.
Really?
I don't know if that's true or not, but Ryan really got a real lesson that day at the soundstage. And of course, later on, Ryan and Bruce became friends, and I always knew they'd get along famously because they're kind of the same kind of guy. Mm-hmm. But Ryan, as a boxer, got a real education, a real schooling that day about about martial arts. And I think after that, he had a pretty good respect for the art.
Nice. So another kind of controversial one that you spent a lot of time around Ed Parker and stuff, and one of his famous students was Elvis Presley. Did you ever get a chance to practice or see Elvis in person? Because that's another one who a lot of people don't think deserved the ranks he got and don't think he was truly a black belt and couldn't really do the technique. And did you ever get to witness that firsthand?
I never did.
Okay.
I was not, I think Elvis came around the Santa Monica School occasionally, and there are pictures of him working out with some of the fellows at the Santa Monica School. I think the photo is pretty well known. If you don't have it, I can send it to you. And he used to come in there periodically and work out with these guys. I know my top black belt is Steve Walton, and Steve Walton has a photograph with Elvis. I know Jack Autry worked out a lot with Elvis down at the Santa Monica School. Jack is one of Ed Parker's oldest black belts and one of the best. He's now married to Ed Parker's daughter, Yvonne.
Oh, okay.
And Jack's a real old timer. He's been around a long, long time. And I know he worked out with Elvis at the Santa Monica School and a number of others, but Jack was probably one of the most noteworthy. Elvis Presley, I never saw him work out. I've seen film of him. I can tell you what Dave Hebler has told me about him. Mm-hmm. Dave Hebler was one of the Memphis Mafia guys.
Yep.
He's written a couple of books on Elvis. Yeah, he's written one book called The Elvis Experience, written by Michael Miller with Dave. And Dave said essentially that Elvis may not have known all the forms and all of that, but he could take care of himself. He was a strong guy. He was a very highly coordinated guy. If you watched some of his what he does in his concerts, he was no bumbling idiot. I mean, yeah. He was an athlete, and but Dave said he could take care of himself, and he was a gifted martial artist. Did he know the entire Kenpo, American Kenpo curriculum? Probably not. I can't attest that he didn't, but I would wager that he didn't. But there's a lot of guys walking around right now with high belts on that don't know the whole curriculum.
True.
That's not news. So yeah, I think Elvis was very legitimate. And keep in mind that ranks of black belt after third degree in American Kenpo are all based on service. There is no way. I often ask people, I say, what did you have to learn to go from fifth to sixth? Or what's the difference between a sixth and an eighth or an eighth and a 10th? They can't tell me. There is no physical knowledge that you learn.
Okay.
But there is service. Ed Parker said it's based in service. And I don't think there's anybody who helped spread American Kenpo in service more than Elvis. I mean, I think his Hawaii concert, wasn't that a record breaker?
I think so.
The amount of people who watched that concert on cable and television and everywhere, I think it was worldwide. And if you look at Elvis's guitars, he's got the American Kenpo patch on all of his guitars.
But I do also remember that he had the footage that from the documentary he was planning. I think that was finally released a few years back. He went to a bunch of tournaments and recorded some of the top Kenpo fighters and karate fighters at that time, and he was gonna narrate the documentary. It was his original plan. I think the footage disappeared for like 30 some years before the documentary finally came out.
You're referring to the what's the name of that?
It was like When They Were Kings or something like that, or
well, I think they later tried to make it into that. It was the I wish I could remember the name. I
know I watched
anyway,
it.
what that footage came from is Elvis Presley financed an American team of fighters to go overseas and to fight in Europe and to fight various places. It's called the American Gladiators.
Yes.
And Elvis Presley financed, the guy that put that together was George Waite, who was one of Ed Parker's first generation black belts, and really a nice man too, and a brilliant guy. And George had put together something Gladiator. Oh, the New Gladiators. It's called the New Gladiators.
Okay, yeah.
And he put together a team of fighters that Benny Urquidez was on. There's a list of guys that fought on that. I could get you the list. I can't remember.
I think I have the DVD, actually. I think I bought it when it came out, when they released it.
Tom Kelly is on that team. Benny Urquidez is on that team. Anyway, it was a team, and Elvis financed that. I think he financed the filming of the New Gladiators. Plus, he paid for the uniforms and the travel. And Ed Parker was the coach of that team, I believe, or one of the coaches, because he travels with him. But yeah, Elvis was the financial backer of that. And I don't know whatever happened, why that didn't, why that got into a problem with why it wasn't immediately produced as a documentary, but there was some either legal issues or something.
I think it was who owned the rights or whatever, and it was in limbo for a while, and politics like usual.
Well, I guess that's true. I mean, he was filming people that he might not have had a release form from. Maybe that was the problem, you know?
Yeah, something like that. But so now, as I mentioned at the beginning, you've written numerous books, and you know the first well, actually technically the second one. The first one I read was The Journey. Obviously, that when that came out, you know, I was still heavy into American Kenpo, and that's when I first reached out to you, and that's when you sent me an emailed copy of Unsettled Matters, which I hadn't even heard of at that time. Surprisingly, as big of a Bruce Lee fan I was, but so can you just talk a little bit about that book and kind of what made you decide to write Unsettled Matters?
Well, Unsettled Matters was my second book on Bruce Lee. And I had written the first book when I did the a tribute to Ed Parker in 1988. It was held at the Bonaventure Hotel in Los Angeles in the California Ballroom. Linda Lee was one of the guest speakers who came on behalf of Bruce. And I had not seen Linda for many years prior to her coming to the tribute. And after the tribute ended that evening, she said that she'd like to talk to me and would I meet with her for dinner the following week? I said, sure, I'd love to. She had been paid to write a book on Bruce's life story. It was going to become the movie Dragon, the Universal movie. And she wasn't a writer. And she needed a writer who knew Hollywood and knew Bruce and someone she could work with. And she asked if I would be interested in doing the book with her. And I said, yes, I would. And I wrote that book with her, during the course of which we got married just around the time that the book was released. And I'm not married to her now, but we were married shortly after that. And in that book, the book did well, and the movie Dragon was well received, but I felt that it really wasn't a complete story of Bruce. And I felt that I had helped to promote an image of Bruce that was really not entirely factual. And I decided to write that second book, Unsettled Matters, which really balanced out the story that I had written with Linda in the Bruce Lee story. And that's the reason I wrote that book. It gave a new perspective of Bruce throughout his lifetime, his childhood, and really addressed his death. Mm-hmm. The first half of the book is his life, the second half is his death. And when people read about how he died and about the inquest and about the life insurance policies and so many of the things that were going on around him, and that no, he didn't die as a multi-millionaire. He died broke. A lot of people didn't understand. A lot of people didn't understand the deals that he had in Hong Kong and how he was used in Hong Kong and how he had been misrepresented, or not at least thoroughly represented. When he died, in all those movies he made, he had no contracts. The only contract he ever had was for his last movie, Enter the Dragon. And so I felt I really wanted to write a more, I don't want to say necessarily more honest, but at least a thorough book on Bruce. So that's why I wrote that book. Okay. And it became a bestseller. I mean, it took a while, but it's been very widely well received.
Okay. So now, obviously being a friend of his, just curious, your opinion, how do you think Jason Scott Lee portrayed him? And I know a lot of the stuff in the movie maybe wasn't accurate, but how do you think Jason Scott Lee did portraying Bruce Lee?
I thought he did really well. I mean, it would be really hard to come in and to really capture the essence of Bruce. But I think Jason Scott Lee, I think he did an excellent job of portraying him. And he had to learn to look like Bruce in a matter of a few months. And I think he did a great job. I think there was a lot of the things in Dragon that really bothered me. So many things that were done in Dragon that just didn't happen. You know, that I'll give you one of the scenes in there that bothered me was the scene where Bruce is in the hospital. He's been allegedly kicked by somebody, and he's in the hospital. He's in traction, and Linda comes in, and the doctors had told him that he will never kick again, and he's finished. And she comes in and shows him, look at this, your book, Jeet Kune Do. What was the book? The JKD?
The Tao of Jeet Kune Do?
Yeah, the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. Yeah. Look, it's been published and all this. None of that ever happened. None of that ever happened. He never went to hospital. He never had that serious back injury that put him in traction. No one ever told him he would never kick again. None of that ever happened.
Well, then the book came out after he died, didn't it?
The book came out after he died, and he didn't write that book. So I saw that and I said, this is beyond when you're doing a biography as a movie, there's a license where you can kind of stretch things here and there, but this was beyond the peril. This was a little too much as far as I was concerned. And, ironically, in the book, the Bruce Lee story that we did, there are pictures of him in the desert in India, and he's doing these flying sidekicks. Well, right around the time he was supposed to be in traction, having been told you'll never kick again, he's doing these flying sidekicks on the Indian desert. So it just, there was a lot of that. But the movie itself, I guess it was good entertainment.
Yeah, it was entertaining.
Thought it was great entertainment, but factual.
No. The sad part about that is, like, I'll see internet arguments about Bruce Lee on like Facebook groups and stuff, and people will basically quote stuff from that movie as fact. I'm like, that's your whole basis for fact, is that movie? Do a little research.
Now, that's the problem when you do something, when you go out to the mass media goes out and presents, a life of someone that just isn't factual. Not that a lot of it, what they put out is factual, but
right.
When you start putting out things that Bruce could have beat all of the great tournament fighters, he was the toughest man in the world. When he died, he was a physical specimen that wasn't, he was very sick when he died. He was in bad physical, shape. When he died, he weighed less than 120 pounds, around 120 pounds. Wow. He was emaciated. He was not in great physical shape. So you start putting these things out about this man that's bigger than life and is in remarkable physical health and was the toughest man on the planet. Then you say, oh, and by the way, he died from a single tablet of equagesiac, an aspirin. Of course, people are going to be alarmed. They're going to say there's something wrong with this story. Well, the way it's presented, there was something wrong. But in my book, when I started laying out what had happened, they said, well, now this is more understandable. This one I get,
So do you think we'll ever get a good Bruce Lee biopic movie? You think you'll ever see one?
I hope so. One thing comment that's been repeatedly made about Unsettled Matters is a lot of my readers have said, thank you for giving us an image of Bruce Lee that they can identify with. It's a human being that you can be compassionate about and can understand and feel empathy for. When I was writing some of the scenes and some of the chapters in Unsettled Matters, I got choked up and my eyes filled with tears because I realized the amount of pain that Bruce went through, the suffering that he endured, both physically and mentally and emotionally, to become the man he became, the price that he paid. This man worked out harder than any martial artist ever in the history of martial arts or boxer. I've never known any boxer that worked out. Well, maybe Ali did. Maybe, I don't know. There may have been some boxers that worked out that hard, but no martial artist that I know. I mean, what he paid to become the martial artist and the film legend he did, he paid a heavy price. And it was painful to watch and to read and to know what he was going through. When he went to Linda and he said that famous line, he said, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. He wasn't talking about the film schedule. That was part of it. But he was talking about living the life that he was having to live to become an international superstar. He really paid with his life, really, ultimately. I mean, he never rested. What he had to do to complete that movie. So, I hope that if they do a biopic of him, that they bring all that in, the emotional, I'm reminiscent of the movie. Have you seen the movie Raging Bull?
Oh, yeah. Great movie.
Okay. That's a movie that could be a parallel to Bruce Lee. Raging Bull, the amount of pain that, what was the boxer's name? Slips my mind at the moment.
Yeah,
anyway,
drawing a blank.
In Raging Bull, the boxer who was a true life story, what he went through to become a world champion was phenomenal. I mean, he paid a heavy price, to become the world heavyweight boxer. Was he a heavyweight boxer, middleweight?
Middleweight, yeah.
I think it was middleweight. And it was the same with Bruce. I mean, he paid a heavy price. And when I was writing about that, I really came to really be saddened to really feel tremendous compassion of his spirit and what he was willing to do, what he was willing to give to become the man that he did as a martial artist and a screen star. It was very heartwarming, but also very, very hard to grasp as a human being. And I hope that somebody brings that out in a biopic, not just to say he was a great fighter and a great martial artist and a great teacher and a great all this and a philosopher, but to look at the man himself inside, his spirit, to what he was willing to achieve a goal that he believed in. It was a tremendous story there. And I hope somebody someday tells that story. I understand they're doing a documentary on him now.
Okay.
Another one. And I hope that brings that out. I had talked with the producers of that documentary, and I had a similar difficulty with the producers of this one that I did with the ones that were doing autopsy, is that they wanted a lot of my documentation of my book. And I just can't let a lot of that out because a lot of it was done under a confidentiality agreement. And I can't just name names and give interview tapes to people that I legally bound, and ethically too, as a biographer, that I just can't give out this information. I said, I'll allow you to listen to some of it, but I can't give you their voice. I can give you a capsule of kind of what I was said, some of it. So anyway, but I know that they're doing a documentary that wants to tell a full picture of Bruce's life story, and they have a good heart.
Okay.
The person doing it has a good heart, and they really want to hold Bruce to the highest esteem, and I'm sure they will. But they want to tell the story that I tried to tell in my book, Unsettled Matters. In fact, that's why they called me. They had read my book and said they wanted me to come in and be a big part of the documentary, and I decided I just couldn't do it for the reasons I just told you.
Okay. So then obviously you've definitely made a name for yourself writing about martial arts. Like I said, the first book I learned about you was the Journey, the Kenpo one, but some of the other ones I'm interested about, some of the other biographies you did. Now, did you seek those out or did they seek you? I know some of the ones that jump to mind are the Grandmaster Byung Yu, Taekwondo Grandmaster, the Donnie Williams book. I mean, are those ones that you wanted to do or were you approached to do them?
Let me go back for a minute to the Journey, because you originally asked me, brought that up, brought it up again. Let me mention about the Journey. When Ed Parker died in 1990, there was our Kenpo community became fractured. No one had anticipated him dying at the age that he did. And a lot of people went out and formed their own organizations and all that. And basically 10 years down the road, I felt that if a book were written that had featured the top 24 martial artists in American Kenpo, that this would help bring our community back together. And it did just that. It was a very successful book that debuted at Bally's Hotel in Las Vegas. And that weekend of the debut of the Journey book was really one that all of us who were there will never forget. And since then, there have been 2 more Journey books that have been written over the past 20 years that are now the Journey trilogy, the Journey, the International Journey, and then Journey Book 3, which features the new up-and-coming, highly established new generation of Kenpo greats that are on the horizon. So that series of books has been very successful, and I think has been a great add to the Kenpo community.
Now, wasn't there a 4th one that you didn't have anything to do with? Was that something that were you involved with at all? There was a female, I can't remember her name.
Yeah, there was a book. I forgot her name at the moment. There was a book that was done that was basically the same idea of the Journey book, but it was a really small, instead of the chapters that I had in my book were, I think each chapter was 4,500 words, and each one had 24 photos, maybe, I'm thinking. Mm-hmm. This book, each person who wanted to tell their story had to tell it within, 2 pages, 2 or 3 pages, and 1 picture, maybe, that was it. So it was a really mini version of anybody who wanted their story told. I don't know if they paid to get their story in there. Maybe I don't think they did. I think they could come in just to get their story in, but then the person that did it knew that the people that were in would buy copies, and so that was the basic idea. When I did the first Journey book, a lot of people don't know this, but the people that made the most money on the book were the honorees themselves, because I told them, I said, you can buy discounted copies of this book for 40% discount, and I will freeze the market for 30 days. In other words, anybody wants a copy of this book for the first month, they've got to get it from you. Okay. And you'll sell it to your schools and your followings and your organizations, and that's where you will make the money, your royalties from the book. And I did. I know one individual bought 400 copies. Wow. And others, there were a great number of them, a fair number of them made more money than my publishing company made. And, which was the idea I wanted in the beginning. I wanted these people to make, some money for their time. And because it was their, being who they are, many of them are still teaching, that made the book work. They were the the legacy of American Kenpo, or a major part of it. So that's the way. And I'm sure that fourth Journey book did the same thing, that the people could buy books maybe at a discount and then resell them, something like that.
Back to my other question then about some of the other biographies you've done on other martial artists. Were those, like I said, your ideas, or were you approached to do it? And what kind of led to some of those?
They were all different. The Beyond You is a very gifted martial art who was known as the Killer Korean. He was known on the tournament circuit as the Killer Korean. And he became very, very successful man in a lot of different areas. He taught a lot of celebrities. He had his own studio, believe it or not, at CBS Studios. The head of CBS Studios gave him a whole wing of near the parking lot that became his dojo. And he's very well known, Beyond You. And he came to me and asked me if I would write his life story. I can't remember I remember how it happened. He had gone to Joe Himes first to do the book, and Joe was writing a book for Norris at that time. He was writing Norris's, I think, the third book Joe had done for Chuck Norris. Okay. And he just couldn't do it. And Beyond said, is there anybody you could recommend? And Joe said, there's only one, and he referred him to me. That's how I got writing the book for Beyond You. And it was written for Hay House Publications. Hay House at that time owned the self-help industry, may still. Very highly successful publication company. But I had to be approved by Hay House. And so I submitted some of my books to them, and they read some of my writing, and they approved me. And I wrote the book with Beyond. It's a good book. It's a good book. It's done very well. Beyond now is well into his 80s, isn't he?
Yeah, he's got to be up there, yeah.
Very gifted martial arts. If there's a guy that ever worked out as hard as Bruce got close to in the martial arts, Beyond You.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
He would do 1,000 kicks a day. He was even after he was well into his 70s, he was giving demonstration. Well, I went to a demonstration with him. It was held at CBS Studios. One of his top students was the head of Warner Brothers. Alan Horn was the head of Warner Brothers for years. One of Beyond You's students, black belts. He's taught a lot of them. Anyway, he did this physical demonstration at CBS Studios. It was quite impressive.
And then what about the Donnie Williams book? That one, I didn't know about that one. I just found that one on your website when we started talking about this. So that's another one I'm going to be ordering to read. That looks like a really good book.
It is, and it's been well received. Donnie Williams was a guy that was very successful. He was very involved in the BKF. And he fought in the tournaments for many years. He was known as the clown of the tournaments. He would show up in a Bentley or a Rolls Royce in a big flowing cape and these incredible wardrobe that he'd come flying in there with. And he was quite a spectacle, but he was also a good fighter. And he at that time was a devout racist. I mean, and admittedly hated white people, hated white men. And that's the reason why he claimed that he did so well in fighting in the tournaments, because it fueled the racism and the hatred he had towards whites, and he'd just go after them.
Wow.
And he was a good fighter, but he was all fueled by racism. And then one time at the internationals, he had entered the tournament when he was out of shape, and some white man had goaded him. He was Donnie was there as a judge, and some white guy came over to him and started bad-mouthing him because he had made a call against the guy's kid as a judge. And the guy said, "Oh, you're nothing but a has-been. You're just all wiped out. You're a nobody. You're nothing." And Donnie said, "Oh, really?" So he entered the tournament. He went over to one of his friends. He says, "Give me your gi. I need a belt. Give me a black belt. Give me a black." And he entered the tournament only to beat this guy. He said, "I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to beat the daylights out of it. I'm going to teach this guy a lesson." And he entered the tournament. It's in the book. He went into the tournament, he entered it, and by the time he got in the finals, it was these two guys that made the finals. But he knew that he couldn't beat him. He just knew it. He'd watched this guy fight. He said, "I'm not going to be able to beat this guy." And he went in the Long Beach, the third floor of the Long Beach Sports Arena, and he went in the men's room and he got on his knees in one of the stalls. He was in the men's room by himself and he prayed to God. And he said, "You help me beat this guy and I will serve you for the rest of my days." And he went out there and he miraculously beat the guy.
Wow.
And from that moment forward, he parked God. He said, "Well, thanks, God. It's been great." And he went on his own and he started making movies, started doing all that. And then during an interview one time, somebody said, after he told the story, he said, "So what have you done about serving God?" And that got him. He realized he had done nothing.
Wow.
From that moment, he left the business as an actor. He stopped all that, and he became a preacher. He became a minister. He became a pastor. I think he calls himself a pastor. I don't think he says he's a preacher. He's a pastor. And he's the head of the family church. And I was so moved by his story when I heard it, because I interviewed him. He was one of the Journey honorees in the original Journey book. When he told me the story of what had happened to him and how he had come to God, I said, this guy, his story really needs to be told. And because of that book and the telling of that story in that book, I got a call shortly after the book came out from Pat Robertson from the 700 Club and said, can you put me in touch with Donnie Williams? You want him on my show. And he got on the Pat Robertson show, the 700 Club. And following that, he got on the biggest show at that time, TBN Broadcasting, Trinity Broadcasting Network, TBN. And he got on the Praise Hour. They gave him a full hour to talk to 23 million people.
Wow.
So that book and his life story got him in front of millions and millions of people. And he's a great pastor. He's a man of God, no question about it. He's a lovely human being. He still is a good friend of mine. And but he's a man of God, and he has devoted his entire life to God. He really has. He walked away from a whole lot of stuff and now is a full-time pastor. Very well loved by many people, and still a great martial artist, in my opinion.
Okay, well, I'm definitely adding that one to my list. I love reading, so I'm anytime I have a guest and they mention books and books and books, and obviously you've written many, so I'm going to be adding a lot to my list.
You'll thoroughly enjoy that one.
Okay, well, one other one I wanted to touch a little bit on before we get to your newest book is one of my favorite martial artists that I've looked up to for a long time is Benny the Jet. You wrote his biography, and I know you've known him for a long time too, and kind of talk about that one just a little bit.
Yeah, Benny was he'll go down in legendary martial arts hundreds of years later. He's immortalized as one of the great martial artists of all time. I, of course, who didn't know Benny Urquidez from the internationals and his kickboxing record, and he was just a legendary, the Jet Center and everything else. He was a household word in martial arts. And I was at a function one night. It was a dinner function. It was maybe, I want to say 200-300 people there for dinner. And I was standing before the dinner, before this whole thing started up, and I was sitting, it was like a cocktail hour, but there were no cocktails, really, just people standing around talking. And suddenly there was this silence that came over the whole room. I mean, somebody turned the volume down in that room by 90%. And it got my attention. I said, what happened? What happened in here that suddenly people stopped talking? And I looked away from the person I was talking to, and I saw that everyone was looking towards the entrance. And I looked over, and there was Benny. Benny Urquidez had walked into that room, and it was a big room. It was a big room. It was a banquet room, but it was big. He had walked into that room by himself, and he was looking around for somebody, or looking around for his table or something, or maybe he was looking for his wife, Sarah, who might have come in early, moments before, or whatever it was. He was just standing in the doorway by himself, and they were looking at him, and they weren't talking. And I said to myself, wow, the only other person I had seen that happen with, the other two were Bruce Lee and Ed Parker.
Wow.
And I said, man, there's a reason for this. This man, so I sent Benny a letter after that. And I said, if you'd like to get together and talk about your biography, writing a biography, I'd like to talk with you about it. And somehow that letter never got to him. I thought, well, he's just too busy, he didn't want to do the book or whatever. And then I saw him a year or so later, and I said, gee, it's a shame you didn't want to do your biography. I was kind of looking forward to it. He said, what are you talking about? I said, I sent you a letter. You didn't. He said, what letter? You didn't know anything about it. So when we talked about it, he said, yeah, he very much would like to do the book. And so I met with him, and I interviewed him over the course of many meetings. And he was, Benny impressed me, still does. He impressed me so much, because I always ask anyone I'm doing interviews with, no matter who it is, I said, what's the general flavor of this book? You want this a vanilla book? Do you want this a middle of the road? Do you want this a tell-all? What do you want? And Benny said, I want to tell everything. I never forget this. He said, I want the good, the bad, and the ugly. I want it all in there. He said, I want holding nothing back. He put everything in there. All the good stuff is in, and all those not so good stuff. But he talks about his drug use. He talks about his he went to prison. I was surprised he put that in there, but he said, no, I was sentenced to to prison. He went to jail. He was jailed for assault. And he put it all in there. And it's also the wonderful thing about Benny in that book is, and I hope someday someone's going to do a movie, it's a wonderful love story. His love story with Sarah, his wife, they're still married, very happily married. There's a wonderful love story in this book about how this guy, it's almost, you remember the love story in Rocky? It's kind of that same thing. Sarah was this goody kind of person that did everything right. And she just, and she got tied up with this bad boy and who winds up going to jail, and he thinks that she's finished with him. And he gets out and he gets his life somewhat together and somewhat successful. He buys a new car and he says, I'm going to drive over to Sarah's and I'm going to tell her, because I know she hates me, and I know, and I want her to know that I'm not the rotten down. I'm going to give her a piece of my mind. He drives over there, he knocks on her door. She opens the door, and before he can say anything to her, she says, "Oh, Benny," and she throws her arms around him, as I recall, and he couldn't get a word out. And from that moment on, they were together. Wow. And it's a wonderful love story about he goes out and she says, "I'll marry you, but you've got to get a real job." And he does. He goes out digging holes at a golf course. And she was the driving force behind him, or a major force in him, that made him become the great kickboxing champion that he became, was Sarah. He was doing a lot of this for Sarah. He gave up drugs and alcohol. He gave up a whole lot of stuff for her. Today, he's a remarkable, highly successful person. He's one of my best biographies. And I'm very proud of that book that we did together. I think he is too.
I'm excited to read it. I was lucky enough to meet him at the 95 Long Beach tournament. He was there. Somewhere I have, an actual 35 millimeter picture with me and Benny back in August of 95. So that was kind of cool. Oh,
yeah. Well, that's a classic.
I know. I got to find it. Unfortunately, a lot of my pictures got ruined. We had a flood in our basement back in, like 90, I think it was 99 or 2000, and lost like thousands of pictures that got wet. So
wow,
I'm hoping that's not one of them.
I have heard of my own travels and all. I should probably ask. I have heard that they're doing a documentary on Benny now.
Ooh, okay. I'll keep my eyes open for that.
Really great. I'm sure that anything that has to do with his life story will be very successful.
And then now, obviously, let's talk about your newest book, your own biography that just came out. Kind of talk about how long the planning was for that, and when you decided to finally write about yourself.
I had started to when I was doing biographies. My first biography, of course, was 1996. Prior to 96, all of my work was done in films, was motion pictures and television. And I had never done a biography. No, actually, my first was with Linda. It was the Bruce Lee story in 1988. Then I started doing biographies. After I did that, I started doing biographies of Journey and all these other biographies. And I thought, I should probably start doing my own life story, putting it together really for my own benefit. I had questions of my own life that were troubling me. And I started making notes of my childhood and areas of my childhood that I had lost and people. And I said, I'd really start to make a journal here of my life. So I started putting that together and the scenes together in my head of where my life had gone and my own problems in life. And I've had plenty of them. So then I realized, I said, you've got your own biography here. It's an autobiography. Well, I put it on the shelf because I could only work on it for a little while, and then I'd get an assignment writing something else. So when I came to this last one, after I had done, what's the last book I guess I did was it Rick Avery's book? No, it was Bob White's book, Bob White's life story, Life in Session. I was now starting to look at new projects, and I said, I've got this one on the back burner. If I don't pull this thing off the back burner now, I'm not going to get it done. So I started working on it, and that's when my wife had a terrible thing happen with her eyesight. She almost lost her eyesight. She got an infection in her eyes, and I had to bring in another writer to help me do a lot of the heavy lifting, which was Michael Miller, a very gifted author. But it's basically my life story in Kenpo. It's my life as a child, start from the beginning, from birth to the cradle till now. It has a lot to do with my life in Hollywood, in the film industry, film and television. It has to do with my childhood. It has to do with my Kenpo journey. The main thing about why the title, and Ed Parker Jr., Ed Parker's son, did the cover. One of the greatest artists of our time. He's done a lot of great artistic work on a lot of books and a lot of things that he's done as an artist. He did the cover of the book. The title of the book, Journey Beyond The Mountaintop, is basically I've heard a lot of people over the years say that there's never a destination in martial arts. It's an endless journey with no destination. And I don't believe that. When I started my martial arts, I did have a destination. I wanted to become a black belt. At some point, that became my goal. And I think there is a goal for many people in martial arts. We set a goal when we start anything. What do you want to accomplish? Well, I go to college, I want to get a degree. I do this, I wanted to become a black belt. And when I became a black belt in Kenpo, Ed Parker had succeeded in removing fear from my life actually that happened when I made brown. But when I became a black belt, I had reached the top of the mountain. And what I saw on the other side of the mountain is what the life that I later on came to live after 1965. And it opened up a whole world to me that I never knew was there. And I would have never seen had it not been for my becoming a black belt and having fear removed from my life. I'll tell you, had fear not been removed from my life, I don't know what I would become. Probably some guy working in a cubicle somewhere, afraid of the world and not reaching out to the what I've been able. I haven't accomplished a whole lot in my life, but what I have accomplished, I attribute to the fact that I was able to remove fear from my life through Kenpo. And so that's the message in my book, is that once you achieve once you get to the top of that mountain that removes all the main negative hurdles in your life, there's a whole world that opens up for you there that you can then, as I did, journey to the other side of the mountain, where you can't see the other side of the mountain until you get to the top.
Right.
And so that's why that's why the title is what it is. And it's basically my story of how I climbed that mountain and what became after I reached the top and what happened when I journeyed down the other side of the mountain.
I love the title, and I think my copy is supposed to, according to Amazon, I think my copy is supposed to be here on Saturday. So
oh, good.
Yeah,
oh, good.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to.
Well, I sent you that brief video from the Legacy Award, and watch that. You got a general overview of the book. So.
Yeah, correct. So now just kind of a few last questions just to kind of wrap things up here and stuff, and maybe some fun things. But first of all, obviously you've been in martial arts for a very long time. Is there any like specific philosophy or maybe a quote or two that really stand out that you've kind of held true to yourself all these years? Maybe a quote from Bruce or Mr. Parker, or just something you come up with yourself, some kind of philosophy that you really enjoy.
Well, the philosophy is kind of, I can't think of a quote offhand. I'm a really stickler. I'm a great fan of quotes, and I've got even a file on my computer of quotes. It's the name of the file, quotes. Nice. But I can't think of one offhand in martial arts. There's a lot of smaller quotes, but nothing that stands as a central driving force in my life, except what I just explained, that martial arts will be a vehicle for a person to improve themselves by removing negatives that is keeping them from growing. And that's what the martial arts did for me. It removed roadblocks and stumbling blocks. What's the old saying, not to use a stumbling block as a stepping stone?
Yeah.
And martial arts has allowed me to use those stumbling blocks as stepping stones, and allowed me to climb that mountain, which I would not have climbed without the art. So that probably wraps up my philosophy. It was a great vehicle for removing roadblocks in my life.
Let's say a friend or an acquaintance or someone asks you they're thinking of joining martial arts, any specific style, whatever. They're either for themselves or maybe their kids. What advice do you usually give someone like that?
Well, I don't recommend that kids join martial arts that use weapons. That's the first thing I would say.
Okay.
There are arts like eskrima and things like that. That's fine for adults, but sometimes I'll see, kids with sticks and things, and I don't prescribe to that. I think that martial arts is a great vehicle for children to learn, mainly to learn a lot of things about respect, mutual respect, and physical conditioning, and a lot of those things. Self-confidence, of course, and all of those things that martial arts are going to teach. You don't want a child to become a bully through martial arts, and that's important for the child to learn the distinction between someone who's joining the art. Ed Parker once said to me, he said, people join the martial arts for two different reasons, basically. You get the bully that wants to become a better bully, and then you become the victim of the bully that wants to no longer fear the bully. Those are the two people. You don't have average normal people. I've often said this in talks that I've given. I said, you don't have some guy come home and say, Martha, the bowling league has just ended tonight, and I've got a couple of free hours now during the week. I think I'll go down to that karate school down the street and learn how to kill people. This isn't something that a guy that's leaving a bowling league comes up with.
Right.
There's a driving something that drives us into martial arts. With children, it's usually the parent that is bringing the child. Sometimes it's a child that's seen karate and says, oh, I want to learn that. Or then another kid is like, but a lot of times it's the parent. When I had my own school, I used to have mothers come in with their child and said, I want you to teach my child discipline. I want you to discipline to my child and teach him. I said, wait a minute. That's not something I can guarantee you here. That's something you have to do in the school and the counselors and the church and the Boy Scouts and all that. I'm teaching self-defense here. As a sideline, your child's going to learn some respect, but I'm not going to become the bad disciplinarian. That's not what I do. And so a lot of times parents are bringing the child who's having problems, they bring them to karate. Sometimes it works, but for the most part, I think kids come in to learn physical, the physical aspect of the basics of martial arts.
Okay.
You asked me about what martial arts I would advise. I would advise going to martial arts that's going to teach you good basics, good, solid, strong basics. How to kick, how to punch, how to maneuver your footwork, how to stand, how to block, learn basic, because that's what's going to save your life in self-defense.
So this next question, this one I'm kind of excited to hear your answer. Being an author yourself and you've written so many great books, do you have a favorite martial arts book yourself that you've read?
Oh, gee. Well, I would say that my favorite martial arts book, it's a short book, but my favorite martial arts book is Zen in the Martial Arts.
Joe Hyams. Yep.
Joe Hyams. Joe was a very close friend of mine. I knew Joe for many, many years, and Joe was a remarkable human being, a mentor of mine in writing, and a good friend, and a very accomplished martial artist. And I understand from his wife Lisa, and I have no reason to say this is wrong, but that Zen in the Martial Arts is the highest selling martial arts book in the history of martial arts every year.
Really?
And I think it's probably true. And the reason why is because Joe touched on a book and wrote a book that crossed over. Anybody in any style can read that book and gain from it. They cannot gain from the Journey book so much unless they're in Kenpo. And I thought that Kenpo would have a great crossover readership, but it didn't. It stuck to Kenpo. But Joe's book had a wonderful crossover. People in JKD read it, and Shotokan read it, and Kenpo read it, and Aikido read it, and Bongsu Hong's people. It had a great crossover readership. And that's why it sells so many copies every year. Beautifully written book. And as I said, Joe is one of the all-time great, wonderful human beings I've ever known.
I think you're the fourth or fifth guest that has mentioned that book. So it's one of my top favorites too. So
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. Yeah, what a beautiful book.
Final kind of fun two-part question to wrap things up here. Do you have, whether it's just a guilty pleasure or whatever, but favorite martial arts TV show and or favorite martial arts movie?
I don't have a TV show as a favorite. Okay. I do have my favorite martial arts movie is Enter the Dragon. I think it's the best martial arts movie that was ever made. As you recall from my book, Unsettled Matters, a lot of people don't know this, but I asked them, I say, what do you think made that movie? You think it was a script? And they say, well, no. I said, what's the story of that movie? They say, well, it had something to do with a tournament, didn't it? I said, yeah, it did. Who was in that? Well, it was that guy. They can't tell me that, but one thing they remember above everything else is Bruce Lee's action scenes.
Yep.
You know how much of that movie is Bruce Lee's action scenes?
How much?
11 minutes.
Seriously?
11 minutes of that movie. If you took a stopwatch and ran that movie and started at any time Bruce is up and running, 11 minutes of that movie made that movie the greatest martial arts box office movie of all time.
Wow.
And it's all based on Bruce Lee's athletic martial arts performance, not his acting, his martial arts performance. Because his acting scenes, he only had half a dozen?
Yeah.
He didn't act in that movie. It wasn't any acting at all. But his 11 minutes of martial arts, performance made that movie the biggest box office smash of all time. I'm going to preface this by saying that prior to martial arts movies, because there were movies that came out before his that I didn't think, Hong Kong's been putting out those movies for a long time.
Right.
I used to go this is in my book. When I first started martial arts, they didn't have martial arts movies, but they had samurai movies. And
Okay.
Toshiro Mifune had movies like Sanjuro and Yojimbo, and those movies that I got hooked on Toshiro Mifune's samurai movies. And we used to go to the Toho La Brea Theater and sit there and watch those samurai films. And if you want to watch great action martial arts, watch Mifune's Yojimbo and Sanjuro. See if you can find a DVD or find them somewhere on the internet. You want to see great action with a sword. And a great character. That's all subtitles.
Yeah.
Is Mifune's samurai films, and I was watching those in the early '60s. Those were the first great martial arts movies ever made. And then, of course, after that came Bruce Lee, and then from there we've had them. They come in waves, right?
True, that is true. I actually own Yojimbo. I bought that years ago online.
Well, and I love that whole character. I had it down where I could, when he's walking away and he shrugs his right shoulder, he rolls his right shoulder over to get his gi up. I had that down. And I love the character. He would always sleep before a big fight. He would always eat. I mean, his whole character to me. That whole roaming samurai, whole thing that he had, that he was a sword for hire kind of guy, but he also had a heart where he would help out the underdog. I just love the whole character of that guy.
I need to rewatch that. So one last thing I just thought of, being a Kenpo guy, what were your thoughts on Perfect Weapon? Do you think they portrayed Kenpo well on screen?
I do. I think that they did an excellent job of that. I think Jeff Speakman did a marvelous job. And I think that a lot of the choreography that they had came from Jeff Speakman and Ed Parker. And I think maybe Brian Hawkins maybe had something to do with some other people that were on that set. I know Lou Voiler worked on that set, some of Brian's guys, because Brian Hawkins and Jeff Speakman were very good friends. I think as I recall, they went into a limousine business for a while together, driving a bunch of limousines for Hollywood. Yeah, I think they did a great job on that film. Yeah, marvelous film.
Yeah, that was my first experience seeing American Kenpo when I decided I need to learn this art. And I had heard about it and read about it in Black Belt and seen stuff about Ed Parker and Larry Tatum and everything, but that was my first time actually seeing it. Obviously, we didn't have YouTube back then, so when that movie came out, I was like, "Oh, that's really cool. I need to."
Yeah, and it opened up the door for Jeff to make a number of movies that followed. He had a long string of movies after that. I wish Jeff would get back into acting. He's a gifted, multi-talented individual.
Yeah, I agree, but unfortunately, I don't think he ever had. Perfect Weapon was the most successful one. The other ones didn't do as well. I mean, a lot of them were straight to video, but he was. I mean, so was it Street Night? I think was the next one, and there were some other ones, but they were decent movies.
Unfortunately, that's the way it is. When a new guy comes to the film screen, to the screen, you've never seen him before. The first time you see a movie of an actor of a great performance is the best that they're probably going to be, because then people are used to them. They're doing things and they're moving, and that people are used to seeing it. The first time you see Ed Parker move is the most impressive time you'll ever see him. It's like, wow, what in the world was that? And then the next time you see him, when he walks out to the floor, you kind of know what's coming. And so it's that first impression, I think, that is usually the person's best film. Wasn't that the case with Chuck Norris? Good Guys Wear Black. Wasn't that his first movie?
I think so, yeah.
His first appearance in television was me. I got him on the Julie Andrews show. Did you ever see that episode?
I didn't see. I saw the video clip of it. I didn't see the whole episode, but I saw the video clip.
Well, I think that's the first job that Chuck ever had on television. Might have been his first appearance. I don't know. It's in '72. I don't know when they made Good Guys Wear Black, but then I think with Chuck it was the same thing. It was his first movie, and with Claude Van Damme, wasn't it Bloodsport? Was that his first movie?
Technically, it was his first starring role. He was in that No Retreat, No Surrender. I think it was. Yeah, he played the evil Russian.
Did anything ever surpass Bloodsport?
I'm sure. Yeah, I think so. I mean, as far as like diehard martial arts fans, probably not. But I mean, he did stuff like Time Cop and Death Warrant and Hard.
Okay.
He had a few that I think did well on the box office.
Okay. Well, my point is that martial artists, even Bruce Lee, would have had a hard time topping Enter the Dragon.
Right.
And it's just that way, once you've seen them, after that, you get used to it, and you got to come up with something new that's going to wow the audience. And there's not a whole lot of new that Bruce was going to come up with Enter the Dragon. He put it all on. He left it all on the field, as they say.
Are you surprised we haven't seen more Kenpo on the screen?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Kenpo isn't known for its kicking.
Right.
When I first started in Kenpo, we were basically hands. We had a great kicker, Tom Gow. Chuck Sullivan was a really, still is a good kicker. He's a guy that could kick way up in the air. But we didn't have, Kenpo's never been known for their kicking. We've been known for our fast hands and our techniques, but not really known for kicking. And so much of movie making in martial arts movies is kicking.
True.
When I did the Julie Andrews show, that's the reason why I didn't have Kenpo people. I know when I saw Ed Parker after that show, he said, "How come you didn't come in?" I said, "Well, because they wanted high kickers." And John Natividad and Chuck Norris, John Natividad had won the internationals. And John Natividad was a guy who could get up in the air and do those spinning back kicks. And that's what they wanted. They wanted to see a lot of those high kicks. And I realized, I couldn't come up with a Kenpo guy that could do. Oh, I did. Actually, I called Chuck Sullivan. I said, "Hey, would you be willing to?" He said, "I can't." He had a job and he couldn't leave his job. But I think that's why we haven't seen as much Kenpo. It's because we're so much hands. And with Kenpo, with a martial arts movie, you need a lot of kicking.
That makes sense. Now that you mention, I think that after American Kenpo, after Perfect Weapon, the first one after that, I remember seeing just a lot of hand technique was probably like the Bourne Identity with Matt Damon. They had some really good hand technique in there, and then since then there hasn't really been a lot. Other, I suppose, the Ip Man movies, there was a lot of hand stuff in that with Wing Chun, but makes sense though. There's kicking in Perfect Weapon, but obviously Jeff also had other backgrounds other than Kenpo too. So
yeah, but as I recall, most of the fight scenes what Jeff was doing was mainly hands. His upper body was probably 70-30, 80-20 maybe.
Yeah, I'd say 80-20 easily. There was the beginning scene that wasn't even him when he was a younger version, when he kicked the football player in the head. And then, there was a couple kicks in the one club fight scene. Beyond that, it was, I'd say 80, even 90% hands. So, and it was great.
There's a young actor coming up named Ian Lauer. He's one of Brian Hawkins' black belts. And Ian is in the third Journey book as one of the honorees. And he's been making a lot of movies as an actor, but Ian also trains in other styles.
Okay.
I think he's a third degree now with Brian and with Brian Hawkins. And Ian's made a number of movies. He's a very he's a gifted performer. And he reminds me a lot of the guy that appeared in the movie The Piano, not the piano, the pianist. Well, he has that same look. His face, he reminds me of him when I see him. He was Academy Award winner. I forgot his name right now. Anyway, he has that look. His face is very chiseled. He's got a very distinct face when you see him. Anyway, he's been making a lot of movies. There's another fellow. There's a number of them that have been coming up. James Bennett is another one. James Bennett is from Ireland. He's a very, very gifted martial artist and Kenpoist, and he's been making a lot of movies. And I think he's got a career in front. I think both of them have a career in front of them. James, they're both bodybuilders.
Okay.
They're both gifted Kenpoists, both good martial artists. So we do have some people in Kenpo that are on the horizon to do have a possible chance of making some great movies.
I'll keep my fingers crossed. So, well, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to do this. I know it went a little longer than we kind of planned, but
That's all right.
truly appreciate it. Loved hearing your stories.
Hopefully you'll have fun editing it and you'll have a good finished product, and let me know if you need any fillers.
Oh, for sure. And it might end up being a two-part, depending.
That's okay.
So I think Ed Parker's was going to be a two-parter also. When I interviewed him, we went about the same amount of time, almost 90 minutes. So it'll.
You interviewed Edmund?
Ed Parker Jr. Yep. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
He's quite an intellectual.
Yeah, that was a fun interview. I did that one last week. That was a fun interview. So I got some good stuff.
Yeah. Well, then you know about his artwork.
Oh yeah. I plan on linking his website to my on the show notes and everything. And same with you. Anything you want me to link in here, just let me know. And
well, when you read the Journey Beyond the Mountaintop, you'll read where I give Edmund quite a. I think Edmund in his Paxial arts is going to have a big place in Kenpo's future.
I think so. Yeah, we talked quite a bit about that. It's very, very interesting. Edmund
has balanced out, especially for children, because he's found a non-violent, effective martial arts that I think his father would have leaned towards. He might have said this, I don't know, towards in his later years. I think the Paxial arts that he's worked on for many, many years with his lovely wife, I think that's going to have quite a, it's going to find a nice home in Kenpo when he finally puts it together.
I hope so. It was a great conversation. Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.